So there's a serious need for comparative information. I think everyone thinks it's unfair to say that your child, if you went to go to a quintile 1 school, to say, look where your child performs relative to the whole country. That will be quite unfair information to a parent, to see their child performing right at the bottom of the distribution. But it wouldn't be so bad to say, this is where your child or your child's school performs relative to similar children or similar schools. And at the moment, we have to use things like quintiles and districts, which are quite blunt instruments to compare two different schools. But if we had a questionnaire that asked a few background questions, like we do in SACMEC or PIRLS or TIMS, to parents, to get some indication of socioeconomic status or parental education or language or whatever, we could find quite very similar comparator schools. And we wouldn't have to rely as much on the quintile system, particularly in quintiles 1 to 3. Because the differentiation between quintile 1 to 3 is not very, very good. So this is sort of the crux, that ideally we want principals, teachers, and particularly parents to ask, why are other equally poor schools in the same area performing better than my school? We want parents to ask that question. We want principals to ask that question. Probably you want principals to ask that question before the parents ask the question, so that they can maybe, and that's maybe also one of the ways that the DBE, thinking strategically, may decide to have this sort of progressive rollout of comparative information. Provide comparative information to school governing bodies and principals first for a year or 2 years, and then provide it to parents as well, as an example. And all of this stuff should be piloted and do sort of trials to see what are the effects, documented, write it up, have discussions. Because there's so many potential unintended consequences that can come about because of this. You don't want to just roll it to scale. To all grades, like we did with AMIS. So these are examples of report cards from different places in the world. So this is the Pennsylvania school system report card. So they show you the scores based on male, female, based on the different races, based on whether the child is economically disadvantaged or not, etc. And one of the reasons why I use this one, I don't think that we should be doing this, by the way, in South Africa, obviously. But this is useful. Below basic, proficient, advanced. I think it's nice to have understandable categories that people will understand, whereas our current achieved, not achieved thing is a little bit hazy. This is an example of the Illinois online report card. So I just went onto this thing and picked a random school. You can pick any school in the whole state. And you can see that this school, this is the racial breakdown of the school. This is the average teacher salary, average teacher experience, how much the state spends per pupil, the proportion of students that come from a low-income background, the enrollment of the school, the address of the school. And then it also shows you what proportion of students in this school meet or exceed expectations on the state exams. And you can see that only 17% of students in this school classify as meet or exceed expectation, compared to 60% in the same district or 75% in the whole state. And we can see this over time, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011. Okay. You can even click over here, compare schools, and go and select 5 different schools that are in your district and compare them. Which is, so if you're choosing which school to send your child to, you might go and compare the schools, see the performance, and make a decision like that. And this is all publicly available information, obviously. This is the Illinois State School Report Card. This is actually only going to be implemented in Illinois next year, in 2013. And it shows you what proportion of students are limited English proficiency. Remember I gave that example earlier about American schools classifying the number of students in their schools based on limited English proficiency. Students eligible to receive special education. There's one here, student transfers in or out, reporting transfers, because that's another interesting thing. You don't know how I want to report, this is a great school, and the turnover of students is like 60%. And so maybe they kick the students out or just recruit students. But by reporting it, that would give you a red flag if you saw 60% student turnover. What's the enrollment like? We can also see this one, which is, and that thing is the reason why I showed you this, is schools with similar students. So it shows you the performance of your school relative to schools who have very similar students, which is a much more fine-grained analysis. And there's a bunch of different things. I mean, some of them really go to town and they do number of hours of physical education per child. And they'll put this on the report card, which is quite interesting. It's not only in first world countries or OECD countries. This is an example from Brazil. The Prova Brazil card. Martin did this, or gave this example, and he translated it. And it shows you the averages of the country, of the municipality, of this particular school, of the district, how you're performing relative to those things. Gives you school details. I think there's one of these things is the proportion of students that are classified for a free school meal. Remember, we were talking about contact hours and comparing South Africa to other countries. Average contact hours per day, percentage of teachers with a tertiary qualification, age, grade, distortion, providing all this information to parents. Yes, some parents won't know what the hell's going on. They won't even be able to read it, some of the parents. But some of the parents will, and you only need 2 parents in a school, for example, to read it, understand what's going on, and be on the school governing body to make a change. This is again where I got the little guy from, not one of these people, but there's another report where I got the little man from. Okay?
You've taken him out.
I've taken him out, yeah, I cut him out. And these are where the houses are from. So I didn't actually draw them in paint, I just cut them out of here. And you can see this is showing you the distribution across the performance. I don't think this is a particularly good way of showing it, because basically what it's saying is 26% of students are in this range, and 0 students on this range, and only 2.7% of students on this range. But I think it can be quite confusing to illiterate parents. What else? Scores on language, where the breakdown of whether the school is a state school or a municipal school or a private school. There are various options. So the big caveat, this is sort of coming towards the end of this, the big caveat here is that you cannot use test results for practically any purpose unless they are well aligned with the curriculum, and this is something we talked about earlier. When you're narrowing the curriculum, you would prefer that teachers focus on the curriculum rather than just teach a small subset of the curriculum. And that it also needs to be accurate, trustworthy, reliable indicators of student and school performance. This usually means that the test will be conducted by an independent external body, or at the very least are centrally marked. So I'm not sure, are the systemics administered by an external body as well? Because that's one of the things, is you can get someone else to mark the tests or remark the tests, but you don't know what the administration process was like. Perhaps the answers were on the board, for example. You wouldn't pick that up when you remark the tests. Whereas if you have someone administering the tests, you would pick that up. And that would be like the Western Cape Education Department does with the systemics. This is an example of something in the American media where it came out that these were all the schools, because the information is made public, these are all the schools with questionable gains. So this is the number of schools in each state where the gain was more than 3 standard deviations, which is highly, highly, highly unlikely to be the case in a particular school. So that's why they say schools with questionable gains, and then they go and name the schools and say this seems very suspect that this school has got more than 3 standard deviation improvements. And I think the point that I'm trying to make by putting this here is, with the ANA going forward, the public doesn't necessarily have an opinion on ANA at the moment. They know it's a testing regime, they know that it gets done. If you ask the public, do you have an opinion of the matric results? They will have an opinion on the matric results. And you ask them, are they reliable, do you trust them? If you looked at your grade 11 report card, and then you looked at the matric certificate, which one would you trust more? Most people would say we trust the matric, because it has to be externally evaluated by Umalusi. There's a standardized sort of process of marking and all this kind of stuff. You have the same thing, we would hope, with the ANAs going forward, right? The problem is that you only need one instance to come out where a school has said, oh, this is such a great school, they got a 95% and they're in quintile 2, and then it comes out that there was actually widespread cheating, and the teacher actually filled in all the answers. And if that comes out in the press, then everyone loses trust in the ANAs, and it's very difficult to regain that trust 5 years after you've had something like that. And this is one of the reasons why we have said a number of times that there needs to be, at least at one of the grades, from grade 1 to 6, ANA needs to be administered and marked externally, like it is with the systemics in the Western Cape. And then at least we know that at that particular year, those results are legitimate. The other useful thing is then we can compare. Let's say we did it at grade 6. We can compare the grade 5, which is marked by the teachers, with the grade 6, which is centrally marked. How do the rankings change? If they change drastically, it means that they're not marking that well at a grade 5 level, because you would trust the grade 6 systemics. And that's sort of what I've done here, is using the Western Cape's systemic data for 2011 and the ANA data for 2011. I said, let's rank schools. So this 10 over here means that schools, these 19 and 71 schools, were ranked in the top decile of performance using systemic. Okay? This 10% over here is the best performing 10% of ANA, only Western Cape schools here. So 71 schools were ranked as being in the best 10% in systemic and the best 10% in ANA. Okay? If systemic and ANA were exactly the same ranking, you would just expect it to be a diagonal line. It would only be schools on the diagonal line, right? But notice the sort of spread in the middle. That if we take these, let's say we take these 6 schools over here, those 6 schools were ranked in the 60th percentile range for ANA, but only in the 20th percentile range for systemic. Again, we don't think that that's likely to be the case. And when we're forced to decide between the two, we would choose the systemics, because the systemics are externally marked and evaluated. Now, we wouldn't, in reality, we actually wouldn't expect there to be a diagonal line here. In the same way that there isn't a diagonal line in matric marks year on year. There is some variation, and it's not cheating or anything bad. It's just different students. It could be a different testing. That one test may have tested a different sort of subset of the curriculum compared to the other one, so that the exact same students might have scored differently, as an example. But the point remains that you wouldn't expect this much variation when you're comparing these two things. And then that points to a little bit of a sketchy what's happening with ANA, how's the marking process going, should it be externally evaluated and administered. Okay, so the conclusions. ANA is an important step towards quality education in South Africa, and Universal ANA 2011 data is incomplete and therefore very unreliable to use. This is not verification ANA. If you use verification ANA of 2011, it's completely legitimate to use those scores for the different provinces. But you can't use, for example, the Universal ANA data for the Eastern Cape and do the same thing that I've done with the Western Cape. That would be very sketchy. The need for at least one grade to be externally administered and marked, I think we've already discussed this. And then also, the huge potential for ANA going forward. So we know it's an instrument for accountability and support, but there are various areas which ANA could be used, and we've already discussed some of them. The LOLT, looking at the LOLT issues, comparing performance over time, identifying poor schools that are performing well, all the things we talked about. Something that this is sort of preempting some of the issues, and the people in the department have already mentioned that they are aware of these, but it's still useful to talk about. There are comparability issues between 2011 and 2012 ANA data, and we haven't seen the 2012 ANA data at all yet. I'm just saying that this will be the case. Firstly, the timing in the year. So in 2011 it was done in February, but in 2012 it was done in September. Now if you speak to any teacher, they'll tell you that kids forget stuff over the holiday. So in December and January, if you now test them in February again, they are on the previous year's knowledge, they obviously aren't going to know as much as they would if you tested them at the end of the year. Secondly, you have improved testing skills where students and teachers now are better because they've done it before, they've seen what it's like, they have example questions that they've been given, primer questions that they can run through, they've been taught how to answer questions. So whereas previously you might find students would leave out questions, now their teachers will just say never leave out a question, just guess if it's multiple choice. That would be an example of test-taking skills. The child didn't get cleverer, but based on guessing, perhaps instead of leaving out, they'll get better marks. So we would expect there to be some improvement anyway. Different verification processes between 2011 and 2012. It's unclear what the verification process is going to look like in 2012 yet, and it will be important to compare and contrast those two processes. And then lastly, we would also need to do RASH analysis between 2011 and 2012 to be able to compare the two tests. And all RASH analysis is doing is you've got anchor items that are the same between two different tests, or it doesn't actually have to be the same. It can be the same difficulty between two tests. And then you sort of anchor them to both tests to figure out which one was slightly more difficult or slightly easier, and then equate the two by increasing or decreasing marks. Okay, we've got a number of different questions which we can discuss. I'm sure there might be other questions, but the gist of it is very sort of summarized in this, which is what combination of accountability mechanisms could South Africa implement to raise the quality of education with limited unintended consequences? So that's the first question that I want to put out there for discussion. And then the second question is, what are the types of indicators, because we're in an indicator course, we call them indicators, but what are the types of indicators that you think would be appropriate for a school report, for a provincial report, for a district report, for an SGB report? Do they differ? Should everyone be given the same information? And sort of to get your thoughts as people who are in those different areas of what the types of reports should be given and what they should constitute of. Thanks.